Hey there, you are listening to the Moxie podcast, and I'm your host, Jenny Nuccio, global social entrepreneur who loves to do a lot of good in this world, and best known for being the founder and CEO of Imani Collective. This show started with the simple idea of shining light on ordinary people doing courageous things in this world, and over the years has grown to be a hub of not only courageous conversations, but resources, knowledge, and connection. From topics of sustainability to leadership to, of course, a good dose of social entrepreneurship. If you're looking to grow in your knowledge, develop as a leader, and create a ripple effect of impact in this world, then welcome, Changemaker. It is time to ignite your Moxie. Welcome to the Moxie podcast. We are in a series called Charity Unscripted, and this is our last episode together, and we're going to end on the topic sustainability. It's one of my favorite topics. It's a pretty broad topic. It can be full of ambiguity and different things. But today we're going to talk about self, systems, and succession. The couple of series ahead, or a couple of episodes that we talked about ahead, was what does it look like for overhead? Charity, can you trust it? This trust and mistrust relationship. And then last week we talked about how media can really be on your side and also immediately be on the other side and really destroy your meaningful work. So this is going to be a little bit lighter, but also go deep into strategy, because you as a leader will not be leading your organization the whole time. And we have to face that reality. If you are the founder, this is somewhat of a founder syndrome where we don't want to let go of the things that we started, right? It's our baby. And sometimes we can grow to be a bottleneck of our impact because we are maybe not adaptable, innovative, or we don't want to change. Or maybe we do want to change, but we don't even know that we need to because we have been in it for so long that we don't have that 30,000 foot view, right? Where it's right in front of us and it's been in front of us for many, many, many years. And when people see it from the outside in, they're like, man, if they just changed this and they moved this way, they would be in a much better place. So I want to talk about strategy, because strategy truly does lead to sustainability if it is implemented. Because you can create SWOT plans, you can create 3 to 5 year vision boards, whatever that might be. You can create beautiful strategies and brainstorm it. And that's amazing. And you can pay a lot of money to do that. But if you do not take the strategy and actually put it into place and implement it, then it's dead altogether. So let's talk about what that looks like in sustainability, specifically on the nonprofit side. So if you're joining today and you run a hybrid model, if you are in a business that's a social impact business, that's amazing. I love what you're doing and what you're moving into, but also strategy is just as important in your space as well. So when we are specifically talking about charity, what happens and what tends to happen in the history of charity alone and in the nature of it is that we come in, we see a project, we want to help it, we want to create change, we want transformation, and sometimes good intentions can be bad impact. Sometimes we can have great intentions and it does actually equate to great impact. But at the end of the day, we need to figure out when do we step out of that and when do we pass it on. And so in a lot of my teachings and coaching, I talk about self, that you have to care about yourself. You have to understand the sustainability of self before you are ever going to be able to sustain or bring sustainability to your organization, right? You are the health of that. You start the nature of how your team acts. You develop the culture by how your personality and your characteristics shape that culture. You are a lot in what happens internally in your organization, and you need to be in a healthy place. And what tends to happen in nonprofit leaders is we push and we push and we push. And sometimes we have this martyrdom mindset where we just think we have to give it all, right? And at the end of the day, we're burnt out. And so there's this kind of perpetual cycle of burnout. I talked about in the episode 1 of Charity Unscripted, the first episode of this series, I talk through this idea of overhead, and I gave a personal anecdote and experience of sharing. I believe it was in this first episode. If not, it was in our social impact series. But in the last couple series, I've talked about how I truly believe my passion is creating dignified work. My passion is creating consistent dignified work. And when starting the nonprofit and then moving to hybrid and all the history of Amani Collective and the organization that we run. But when doing it, my husband sat me down and looked at me in the face and said, but what about you? Right? What about you? You care so much for other people and you're pushing yourself to the end. You're working 15-hour days. You're doing X, Y, and Z to make sure that at the end of the day, there's money in their pocket so that there's creation and there's transformation. And then you haven't paid yourself or you don't give yourself a salary. That's a little bit backwards, right? That's a little bit of a conundrum. It's a little bit of an oxymoron, right? It doesn't necessarily make sense to push and be so passionate about something and say, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z because I want them to have this work. And then you're not doing the same for yourself. And you can find this scenario in multiple examples, right? Even in some simple health programs, right? You fight so hard to make sure there's healthy meals for families. That might be something you're passionate about. And at the end of the day, you work yourself ragged where then you don't even, provide for yourself a healthy meal for your body. It sounds so simple, but this happens over and over and over again. And if you are not a nonprofit leader, if you're just listening to this or stumbled upon this most likely happens in your life too. When we love what we do, or when we are just dedicated and hard workers, we will work ourselves to the end and forget to pick up a fork, feed ourselves, forget to get the sleep that we need. And as I'm recording this, I'm sure my videographer behind the camera is being like, what about you right now in your sleep? So this is still a common thing that I fight every day because I care so much about what I do in my organization. I care so much about actually getting this information out to you guys and building Moxie to be a resource for you, that when I'm talking to you, I'm also consistently preaching to myself the same message, right? So we need to make sure we care for ourselves. So it starts with the sustainability of self. And it is a constant work in progress. You will never have made it, right? Last year, I had a beautiful realignment year. I had a beautiful balance of this work and life balance. This year needed a lot of me. We had a lot of rediscovery, a lot of things that we were unearthing in our organization, a lot of restructuring that we had to do. And guess what? It just needed a lot more of my time. And so I think, yes, there are chapters in our book where things ebb and flow, and we need to realize that. But with self and sustainability of self, first starts with self-awareness. And so the thing that I can tell you that is very different to the Jenny now versus the Jenny 5 years ago is that I'm very self-aware of what is happening. And 5 years ago, I'd be in denial and I would keep pushing through, right? So I'm very aware of how my body is receiving things. I'm very verbal about it. And I understand my triggers. I understand when I do need that absolute rest. I understand when I need to kind of be a turtle and in a cave, and when I can actually maybe come out and give it my all, right? So there's a difference in that as we mature as leaders, this awareness of what we need to feed our souls and ourselves. And that looks completely different for everybody. And I'm not talking about capacity or output or what, we all have different capacity levels. I'm just talking about what is it that meets your soul, that meets your emotions, that meets your physical needs. That is different for everybody. And so we need to make sure that we understand ourselves a little bit more, how we can feed into ourselves, how we can get that dopamine fix to just feel good as well, and be able to really care there. When you understand the sustainability of self, then you can move into systems. You're probably like, wow, we're talking a lot about ourselves and we're here to talk about the organization. But the truth of the matter is, you are the organization, especially if you're the founder. But if you're in any leadership capacity, people are looking to you to drive that vision. My team gave me an amazing analogy a couple months ago, or in the beginning of this year, and they said, Jenny, all we need you to do is keep driving the bus, because if you can be healthy enough to keep driving the bus, you don't need to look back. You can trust us because we're going to fix the windows and we're going to fix the wheels and we're going to make sure everything is working on the bus, but you have to keep driving it, right? You have to keep showing up and shedding that vision and sharing it so that we know what we're fixing and how it looks and how we can create it together. And so that's my encouragement to you is, Care for yourself so that when you show up and you're creating systems as an organization, you can create it together. Do not isolate yourself so much that you do put yourself here and your team here, and then you feel completely alone. Leadership is lonely. I will not deny that. No matter how much you want to be the best friend to your colleagues, you are still the boss. You are still the leader, and your dynamic will be different. No matter how compassionate you are, no matter how much your door is open, you are still, at the end of the day, the leader everyone looks up to. And there's going to be a different dynamic than their peers, right? It's going to be different. But you can still come together and create a vision together, but you got to be able to show up. So care for yourself so that then you can create sustainable systems, because within creating sustainable systems, we want to make sure that we're pulling you out of the picture. Now, this is really hard for people to hear. This is where we get into the founder syndrome, because when you're saying pull yourself out of the system, that basically means you are training people up to take over your job, right? And so that can be scary. That can be scary for people to be like, but this is all I've ever wanted to do. This is where I want to be. But especially if you are in international development, if you are anyone that serves in not your culture in a different country, you cannot be, I always say, you cannot be the linchpin of that success. You can't be the bottleneck for where the impact happens. Because eventually you will not be here, whether that means you naturally go in the sense of we all have lives and our lives end, and we have to realize that, or you're not in the place or you're not in the proximity of where the impact's happening. And I see time and time and time again where beautiful initiatives come into place, but as soon as that leader leaves, it dwindles, it dissipates, because there was nothing in place. There was nothing in place to make that long lasting. And in order to create transformation, in order to create change, in order to create generational cycles of change, to create ultimate transformation of what we want to see in social impact spaces, it all starts with leaders. My education background, from my bachelor's all the way to my doctorate, is focused on leadership education. It's something I'm so passionate about. I can talk about assessments, and I can talk about strengths, and I can look and walk into a room and probably identify within the first 5 minutes what someone's strengths are just by the way they act, by the way they relate to people. I know a few questions to ask to kind of pull that out of them. And with that, that's powerful, because everyone who is part of your team has a talent and they have a strength, and you make a body that is healthy altogether, right? We cannot do it alone. And you as the leader need to create systems in place that when you step away, they stand alone. So it starts with one, leadership development. It starts with training up leaders. And again, I say this multiple times. If you need resources, if you need help, if you're like, gosh, that just sounds overwhelming, I don't even know where to start, please reach out to us. You can go to jennynuccio.com. You can find me on Instagram as well, and reach out. We have a lot of free resources, and I just want to see you be successful. So that's one thing. You need to build up local leaders, but at the same time, you need to figure out how your organization ticks. And a lot of that is in your head. And you might not realize that, but I would not be surprised if you sat with your team and you identified 5 different areas in your organization that you work in or things that you do. And then you ask them, hey, can you tell me the process of this? Or, hey, can you tell me where this information is? Or, hey, can you tell me the vision for the next 5 years? I challenge you to do that with your team, because the reality is, if you haven't started developing systems that are sustainable, they will look at you with deer in the headlights look, because they probably only know 10% of what you think they know. I think as leaders, we assume people are in our heads, and they are not. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to start to slowly offload all of that information, and you need to bring other people into those conversations. The beauty of that is you will feel more supported. Your team and your culture will most likely grow to be more united, because they actually know what's going on in your head and you're communicating with more clarity. But three, at the end of the day, if you get sick, if you have to emergency leave, if something, God forbid, a bus comes and it takes your life, your team will be able to run with it, right? And I say that lightly, but things happen. Crisis happens. We had a pandemic. When the pandemic hit, what was so crazy to see when the pandemic hit, especially here in Kenya where I'm located, all of my friends and like Westerners or anyone that technically was here on a nonprofit contract or doing missions or whatever it might be left. I would say 80% of those people left the country. And most of them did not come back. Right? So as my husband and I like stayed grounded to where we were and in the community in Kenya and stayed put, a international global pandemic happened and it completely changed many organizations. Over the next 3 years, we saw all over the globe companies, organizations shut down, not just financially, but also because of a lack of leadership and a lack of planning, right? And so we need to think through that. We cannot look at the future and expect exactly what's going to happen, but we can start now with strategizing and planning that. So we're going to say it again, start with yourself, right? Make sure you're in a healthy place and you're showing up. Then go into your systems. What systems are you creating? This both starts with leadership, and then it starts with identifying what are the programs that you do? What are the activities that you do? You need to put a theory of change, a logic model together. If these are terms you have never heard, let's start looking into them, because that is the foundation of strategy. I do a lot of coaching with nonprofit leaders in this space, and with social impact leaders and with people wanting to move into hybrid models. And we talk about this stuff and we create it, and then we create phase plans and we start to implement it, because the next part of creating sustainable systems is the implementation of it. Because the reality of self and systems is then succession, because there's going to come a place and a time that you might not even realize that you actually want to step out of it. One, there might be an emergency situation, but ideally that is a very low percentage of people that just get kicked out of their situation or something happens drastically. We don't like when those situations happen, but we definitely want to be prepared for any crisis that happens. But the reality of what majority happens is the leader that started it, whether they're in it for 5 years, whether they're in it for 60 years, eventually is tired. And maybe not tired, they're just like, they want to hand it off, right? And they want to transition and they want to kind of see a change. And also the other side and the reality of that is that leader doesn't want to see it fail. They don't want to see it close down, but they just haven't spent that 60 years ahead of time planning for this time, right? It hits them really quickly, and within a year, they might be out of the program, and they could have been spending the last 10 years prepping for this transition and this succession. And so we want to see sustainability through the health of ourselves, through the health of creative systems and sustainable systems that then we're passing on to local leadership, that we're inviting people into the story. We should not be threatened by that. And if you are a leader that is threatened by your team, then you need to have a gut check, because that is not good. And the nature of maybe where you're showing up and the nature of why you started your project, I would challenge you to reflect and process why you started it if you are threatened by leaders in your context, because you should be unified together. You are not one against the other. You are not better than them. In fact, there's the nature of maybe the community you're stepping in. They know way more context than you ever did. And you need to trust that. You need to trust that community you need to build together. So I would check yourself if those are feelings that you're having and why you're having it. And I would also find a trusted community that you could process those emotions with, because that is also not healthy as a leader to feel distrust within your internal community, because then that is going to show externally to all of your stakeholders, and we need to work through that, right? So you have self, you have systems, you want to create healthy systems, and then you want to get to a place of succession, because you should be able to step out and you should be able to leave at any moment, and your team should be able to thrive. So when we're looking at Charity Unscripted as a whole, this episode I feel like has a little bit more practical usage versus this kind of broad overarching viewpoints of our episodes before in this series. In the episodes before in this series, we talked about the nature of how people view charities, right? How people have these emotions to charities and nonprofits. And I was talking with a team member earlier today that really is not necessarily going to change anytime soon. People are still going to have their opinions, and they're still going to distrust, and media is still going to try to destroy meaningful work. So those episodes were actually not anything of like, hey, we can change this overnight. It's really to just share with you the reality of the nature of the field you're in, right? And so as leaders, what can we do to combat how people view us? What can we do to combat how we share about our overhead? What can we do to combat bad media, right? It starts with a plan. It starts with actually acknowledging that all of these situations potentially can and will happen. And we need to have a strategy and a plan to create sustainability for the long term. And that involves your systems, that involves yourself, that involves in all of that, your finances, your strategy, your programs, your outputs, your inputs, all the things. And you need to have diversity in that too. You need to create diversification from the start to the finish so that you can be successful in the end. I'll leave with you this, that again, if you are overwhelmed after this episode, or you jotted some things down that maybe are confusing to you, or if you just know that you need accountability, we are here as a Moxie community. We are here also within the School of Ethical Impact. There's a resource, tons of resources and community there, and I am here for you. There's a lot of connection points that just you reaching out, I'm sure I can connect you to someone, or I can walk alongside you. So I encourage you to email, to reach out. There's tons of different ways that you can get a hold of us. We'll put that in the show notes and also in the description of this episode today, because I definitely want you to feel supported in your journey, whether it is you're in the first 6 months of it or you're in your 50th year. Trust me, we can always start somewhere. Do not feel like it's too late to start planning. Do not feel like it's too late to change your culture. Do not feel like it's too late to be better with being transparent and authentic in your voice and how you show up for people, right? All I want to challenge you every day is to show up in a space and be in a spirit that is learned, that you'll learn from, that is teachable, that can continue to grow. When you are stagnant as a leader, when you become obsolete, or you kind of go into habituation and you stop visioning, and you just kind of are in this methodic routine, which routine is okay, but when there's lack of inspiration there, that's when we need to worry. So let's not grow stagnant. Let's always continue to challenge one another. Let's always continue to grow as a leader and feed our mind and our soul with information so that we can output it to our team. Because again, we are the start of our culture, of our success, and ultimately the sustainability of our transformation. And I, again, am so happy that you landed here today, that you are part of this community. And as always, I just want to encourage you to keep going strong, to keep fighting the good fight, and we are always here for you. We'll see you next week for a new series, and I'm so excited to introduce that to you then, but I'll see you next week, and until then, Moxie on. I love that you were able to join me today, and I'm grateful for the community at the Moxie podcast that continues to grow. To make this show even better, I would love if you could take some time to leave a review, take a screenshot of this episode, share it on your stories, and don't forget to tag the Moxie podcast. I would love to find a way to connect with you. Until next week, friends, Moxie on.